All right. My name is James Shepard. I would like to thank you very much for joining me this morning for our special role play session. I'm going to get my, there we go, got my webcam on. Hey, I'm really looking forward to it. Today we're going to be doing the Donald Trump role play. Now, again, I've said this many times in my articles, but just to be clear, I'm not endorsing Donald Trump any more than I'm endorsing Bernie Sanders, who I'm having a role play session about next week. However, whenever somebody does something successful that I think is improbable, my first reaction is to research how did they accomplish what they accomplished. And so I really don't even mention Donald Trump in any of the slides coming up, but we are going to be talking a little bit about him and how he's been successful at what he's done, both in business and in politics, and how we can apply that to our sales career to be really, really successful. Okay, so, see you, Ben. So making a commitment. So we want to talk about just a few things here about making a commitment to your sales career that I think are really important and that you need to be thinking about. So number one, make a 3 to 6 month decision. Make a 3 to 6 month decision. Now, let me explain this. And I have a little hashtag here, Power of Broke. Now, I haven't yet read Power of Broke by Damon from the Shark Tank, but I'm sure it's really good because I really like Damon. I like a lot of his stuff. He's a great guy. And one of the things that I think is so powerful, once you make a decision and you say, okay, I am going to be selling credit card processing full time for 3 to 6 months. That's it. I'm not going to do anything else. That's what I'm going to do. What happens is you start to get really creative about how to be successful at that, right? Because you have no other way to get any money. And so you have to be successful at that. And you're going to get out there and make it happen. The other thing is when you kind of have this, well, I'll try it out and see what happens mentality, that really sabotages your efforts and you're not going to do nearly as well. Okay, so let me encourage you, first of all, to make a 3 to 6 month decision and make a commitment if you're going to do it. If you're going to do it, make a commitment 3 to 6 months. Whether it's full-time or part-time, we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, next, imagine the worst case scenario. Some of you have a great job right now and you're like, well, I don't know if I want to do this or not. What's your worst case scenario? Think through it a little bit. What would happen if you came on and did this for 3 to 6 months and realized it wasn't for you? What would happen? I mean, just think about it. Could you go talk to your current boss and say, hey, could I get 3 to 6 months? I want to try this business out. If it doesn't work, it may not. I want to come back to my job. This is just something I need to do for me because I don't want to regret not giving it a shot. It might work, it might not. You'd be surprised. Many times a boss or manager will understand that. And they'll work with you and say, hey, you know what, I totally get that. Sometimes they won't. But at least you know where you stand and you know if you make this leap, are you going to be able to get back to where you were at if things don't work out? And I think that's really, really important. You want to know what you're up against. What is your worst case scenario? Okay, here we go. Again, you're going to ask, can I live with that? Can I live with that worst case scenario? And if you can, go ahead and move on. Now, if you decide to make that commitment, that 3 to 6 month commitment, let me give you a couple of other little tips here. Update LinkedIn and Facebook. You got to update LinkedIn and Facebook. You should have it all updated that now you don't work for that company anymore. Now you are selling credit card processing. You can call yourself a merchant services broker, merchant services agent, merchant services professional, merchant services executive, whatever you want to call yourself, right? You can make a local brand and make yourself the owner, whatever. Update your LinkedIn and Facebook profile so that all your friends and all your connections know you're doing something new. And that's really going to help a lot, okay? And by the way, I just realized I didn't have the play button on there. Sorry about that, guys. There we go. All right. Sorry about that. I was recording it, though, so you'll be able to see it in the recording. So update LinkedIn and Facebook. Next, you want to make sure you tell your friends about it, okay? Tell your friends about it. Say, hey, I'm really excited. I'm making a career choice, and I'm doing this for 3 to 6 months full time, and I'm going to see where it takes me. And communicate that to your friends because the more you share that, the more that commitment becomes internalized, okay? Now, one of the reasons I did this making a commitment thing is I was talking about Donald Trump. I mean, when you think about what Donald Trump gave up basically to do what he's doing, when he first started his campaign, he was literally a laughing stock. Everybody pretty much thought it was a joke for him to run for president. And he seemed to be the only one that didn't realize that it was a joke for him to run for president. And guess what? Now he's doing pretty good, isn't he? And he had a business. I mean, if anybody had an excuse for not wanting to get into nasty political fights, it would be Donald Trump. Now he seems to just enjoy it. He loves the fight and he loves the the current environment of it. And so it worked out really well for him. But he had to make that leap from being, CEO of his massive billion-dollar company to saying, okay, I'm going to get into politics. And I promise you, in the last 6 months, I promise you, Donald Trump has not done very much with his business, and I bet that it's taken a hit as a result of it. And so that was a big decision for him to make, but he wasn't afraid to get outside of his comfort zone and try this out. And I would imagine he had a lot of conversations about worst case scenario, right? And for him, worst case scenario is his presidential campaign falters and he goes back to running his business and living in his, apartment that's literally, covered with gold on the walls. That was his worst case scenario. So he's like, you know what, I can live with that. Let's give it a shot. So, so you've got to make that commitment. Last one on here is part-time or full-time. And let me tell you my philosophy on that. I've worked with so many agents. I've gone back and forth. I've switched my, I guess you could call me, since we're talking about politics, right? You could call me a flip-flopper when it comes to part-time or full-time, okay? When it first started out in the business, I was like, whether you're part-time or full-time, just come on over, And then I started saying, if you're part-time, it's not going to work. Then what I finally realized was that it wasn't the part-time. That wasn't what was making people fail. What was making people fail was that they were doing it some of the time. In other words, they were saying, well, I want to do this on the side. Well, what does that mean? If that means, whenever you feel like it, you're definitely not going to be successful. If that means you are going to be very scheduled and deliberate and you're going to, on purpose, spend 15 to 20 hours a week selling credit card processing, you could be very successful, quote unquote, part-time. Okay? So to me, it's not about part-time or full-time. It's about all doing it consistently and saying, here's what I can do, and I'm going to make a commitment for 3 to 6 months, and I'm going to spend 10 hours a week in the field and another 5 hours a week on whatever, paperwork, administrative stuff. That's not a huge time commitment, but it's enough of a time commitment that it's going to work for you as long as you actually stick to it. Okay? So number one lesson we want to learn here from the Donald Trump for president is we want to make sure we're making a commitment. I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind that when Donald Trump got into the presidential campaign, he made a commitment and he said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to run for president. Just recently I watched an interview where he talked about how at this point, if he doesn't win the presidency, he would consider it a huge, colossal waste of time, because he's committed. He wants to win. And again, maybe you love Donald Trump. I did a poll last night. Of my 175,000 Twitter followers, 57% hate Donald Trump and 43% love Donald Trump, and it's interesting to me. He's a very polarizing figure, just like Bernie Sanders. They're both very polarizing figures that people usually either love or hate. It's really interesting. But, nobody could argue the fact that he is committed and he's made a commitment to his campaign. Okay, next. Work like the Donalds. Work like the Donalds, okay? Now, I mentioned this in my blog post earlier in the week, and, I think a lot of people don't know this about Donald Trump, but I think it's a huge competitive advantage. So I'm not recommending you do this, but this is like Donald Trump is kind of a scientific anomaly when it comes to sleep habits. And I don't know how he does it, but I'm insanely jealous. So Donald Trump, since he was like in his early 20s up through his 40s when he was really building his business, he slept for an average of 3 hours a night. 3 hours a night. The rest of the time he worked. 7 days a week. Now, I can't do that, and it's not healthy to do that as a general rule. Somehow, there's randomly going to be some rare people who are able to do that kind of thing. Now, he has to sleep a little more than 3 hours a night now. He's a little bit older, and so he doesn't do that anymore. But still, he is a workaholic. In his campaign, it was funny, actually. I watched, when was it? I think it was after he won the South Carolina primaries, and he was giving his victory speech. And he had Melania get up and give a little speech there in her heavy accent, and she gets up there. And it was funny because one of the things she kept saying was, he is a hard worker. He works so hard, And I kind of sensed this like undertone of maybe he works a little too hard, like his wife's like, I hope he'll lose a couple of these so that we can have a little more time together. I don't know. I felt a little bit of a, undercurrent of dissatisfaction there. But anyway, she did a lot better in her next speech. But the guy is a workaholic. Everybody knows that about him. And frankly, it's a huge advantage, right? As he would say, a huge advantage because he doesn't work he works like twice as much as everybody else. So, now, again, I'm not saying you do that, and one of our core values is always living, which means we look at all the important things in life. But let me just make a couple points about this that I think will maybe hit home with some of you. First of all, TV never made you any money, okay? Watching Netflix never made you any money. Watching Hulu never made you any money. Now, again, I watch TV, I watch Netflix, I watch Hulu, but if you're spending 3 and 4 hours a day, well, understand you're not going to make a ton of money like that, because what's going to happen is, and I'll tell you what happens to a lot of us, and this is really important to understand, but this happens to a lot of us, is that we look at these leisure things that we do in our life and we feel like, well, they're kind of justified. You know what I mean? It doesn't really take that much time. I'm spending, let's say, 2 hours a day on Netflix. And so, it's only 2 hours. I've got 24 hours in the day. I'm sleeping, let's say, 7 hours in the day. So I've still got 17 hours that I could be doing something productive, even if I watch, a couple hours. If I've got 17 hours and I watch 2 hours of Netflix, I've still got 15 hours a day. Well, that's a lot. Yeah, but you know what? The reality of life is that there's many other things that crowd out your schedule. I have 2 kids. I have 2 little kids. This morning I spent an hour before I left home playing with my son and wrestling, and we watched Donald Duck for a few minutes, and then we were doing sword fighting with these. We have these styrofoam swords, which are, by the way, if you have little kids, if you have like kids that like to fight, get them those little styrofoam swords. They're awesome. I have one, and we were fighting with that. And we played for an hour. Well, if I do that every day, 7 days a week, which really I do a lot more than that, because in the evening I play with him. On Saturdays we play for a lot more than that, So that's maybe 8 hours of my week just playing with my son. Then I have my daughter. And a couple days ago we went on daughter-daddy date night, and so I went out. It was like 2.5, 3 hours. I went out, took her out to Subway. Where she wanted to eat. We ate at Subway. We went to the dollar store. She picked out a doll. We went home. We played. I helped her comb her doll's hair. Well, there's another 6 hours, 7 hours, right, of the week, which is great. I'm excited about it. It's not that I don't want to do that at all, but my point is, then of course my wife, I go on dates with my wife. I spend time with her. Tonight I'm going to a hockey game with my church, and the men from our church are all going to a hockey game, and I'm bringing my son, and I'm bringing another teenage guy. So there's other things that are really important, and the problem with the 2 hours of Netflix a day, which is 14 hours a week, is not that by itself. It's that when you take work and everything else and then you try to add in Netflix, what happens is I'm not going to crowd out my time with my son. Like, I'm going to spend time with my kids. I'm going to spend time with my wife. So what ends up getting hurt? My work time, right? So we got to be careful about this and make sure we're not overdoing it. So keep in mind, TV never made you any money. Sleep never made you any money, okay? Sleep is highly overrated. And sleep is very important. However, I think one of the important things is to understand yourself a little bit. I'll give you a good example. For me personally, okay, I can go one night a week right now. Where I'm at right now, I'm 32 years old. I'm not the healthiest person. I can go one night a week where I get virtually no sleep, 2 to 3 hours of sleep. Okay, the pastor at our church, he sleeps 8 hours a night, except for 2 nights a week. He doesn't sleep at all. He prays, he works, and then he prays the rest of the night, and then he goes back to work again. I don't know if I could do that. That's a little much for me. But I will usually have at least one night a week where I sleep for maybe 2 hours, 3 hours, something like that. And that's because I'll usually be traveling that day. So I'll get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'll drive to where I'm supposed to meet at so I can be there by 7 or 8 in the morning. And then I'll drive back. And so I can do that one night a week, right? You've got to figure out, what can you do? What's realistic for you? Because if you just say, well, I'm just going to sleep, whenever, all the time, sleep never made you any money. And so sleep needs to be minimized to the point where it doesn't mess up your productivity. Now, again, I'm not advising that you sleep, 4 hours a night. Now, for instance, my wife, Christina, unbelievable. She is not like Donald Trump, but she's pretty close. She can sleep about 4.5, 5 hours a night, and she's fine like that all week. And she sleeps a little extra on the weekend, but she does that. And, it's like, I'm always so jealous. I'm like, how do you do that? I can't do that. I have to sleep like 7 hours a night, but I can have one night a week where I can only sleep like 2 hours. So figure out your sleep habits and make sure that they're working for you and your family and your responsibilities. But just remember, sleep never made you any money. Laying in bed awake is not restful. And sitting on the couch is not motivating. So just kind of keep in mind that, a lot of times I think we get ourselves into this mindset that's like, oh, I'm so tired. I really just need to lay around today and relax. Why? That doesn't do you any good. Okay, let me give you a really obvious practical tip that I think we've forgotten in this age of like Netflix and everything. If you're tired, go to sleep. And when you wake up, go to work. Okay, I know that sounds like the most obvious thing, but if you're tired, go to sleep. When you're awake, go to work. Okay, it doesn't, sitting on the couch, laying in bed, that although that does feel nice, it doesn't make you successful. It doesn't help your relationships. It doesn't make you any money, and it also doesn't give you any more rest at all. You're laying in bed. It's like, most people will say that if they lay around all day, that at the end of the day, they're much more tired than if they would have got up and gone and done something. So if you're tired, go to sleep. If you're too tired to work, go to bed. If you're awake, then go to work or go spend time with your kids or your friends and family. I mean, go do something, Anyway. So lastly on here, I want to share with you these 3 things. So you say, okay, James, so I get it. So I'm awake. So what are the things I should do? Because even when you're at work, a lot of times it's like we're so busy and it just feels like this, busyness is kind of taken over our life. And we're like, oh, we must be really productive because we're so busy. No, busy and productive look the same. They feel the same. They're not the same. They're totally different. Okay. Here are 3 things that you could do as a merchant services sales rep. And maybe you're selling something else, but these are kind of general idea is meet new contacts. So out there in the field, meeting people you've never met before that could be potential buyers. Going back to collect statements, that's very profitable. And presenting proposals, meaning trying to close deals. Those are the 3 things, and really the only 3 things that are helping you produce more money in your business. So you have to ask yourself, what percentage of my time am I spending on those 3 things? Hopefully it's a majority of your time, but think about it. Do you have a plan today to go meet people that you've never met before, walk into businesses cold turkey, cold call on the phone? Is that part of your plan today? Do you have some people where they promised you a statement and now you got to go back and get it and you're going to do that today? Are you going to go try to close somebody today? Do you have something to present to them? Those 3 things have got to be making up a majority of your day. Otherwise, you're not going to be profitable. So work like the Donald. Next, I want to talk about turning objections into buyer signs. So let's start by me talking about Donald Trump a little bit here, since this is a Trump role play, right? Political pundits from both sides of the aisle would tell you that the reason Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, for that matter, have been so successful is that they've been able to channel this anger in the American populace at government, at the quote-unquote establishment politicians, at these things of that nature. In Donald Trump's case, illegal immigration, these other issues. And so he's been able to find that kind of anger in his target market and channel that into support for his goals and his objectives. So one of the big lessons I've learned from Donald Trump this year, and I've learned many lessons, and again, I will say without hesitation that I've learned many things from Donald Trump. I really have. Now, he's not my personal cup of tea politically, but I have learned a great deal from him, and I continue to learn a great deal from him. I've read every business book he's ever written, I think, and I still follow his political campaign, and it's amazing. I mean, it really is. And so there's some things I've really learned from him. And one thing I've learned from Donald Trump, especially this last year, is that you've got to understand your target market. The irony to me is, as you watch, these debates and as you watch these other political candidates, it's almost like they are pitching a totally different group of people. You watch Donald Trump and it's like he's running for president of a different country from the country that these other candidates are running for. It's like these other candidates many times have had no understanding at all of the electorate. Jeb Bush is a great example of that. Somebody that came into it, and I really like Jeb Bush. I think he's an honorable guy. Came in, he had $150 million, and he had tons of money to spend on the campaign. But it was like he just didn't get it, and it was like he kept fighting Trump like, this guy, it was like he kept saying what Trump's going to do isn't going to work. It isn't going to work. It isn't going to work. He's never going to get elected. But yet Trump kept getting more and more and more support because Trump understands his target market, okay, which is right now Republican primary voters And the vast majority of them are upset at the Republican Party. They're upset about illegal immigration. They're upset about the Obama administration. They're upset about all these different things. So he's figured that out, and he's channeled that into these specific brand promises, like, I'm going to build a wall. You know, everybody laughed at him when he said that the first time, right? I'm going to build a wall. And still the debate rages about, you know, how realistic is this? Is this ever going to really happen? But the reality is, it's exactly what his target market wants to hear. It's exactly what they want to have happen. And he got that. You know, he came out and said that, you know, we want to put a ban on, you know, Muslims that we don't know anything about or that we're suspicious about from entering the country for a while the terrorism is going on. And he was universally eviscerated for that, on both sides of the aisle for that. And everybody thought, well, that's it. You know, there he goes. He shouldn't have said that. Now his support's all going to go away. No, because the people that support him, that was what they wanted to hear. And again, you can argue about I'm not making the political argument. I'm not making the philosophical argument. I'm just saying it was very effective. Okay. So let's ask a few questions and see if we can maybe learn a lesson or two here from this and apply this to our own sales process. Okay. What are your prospects angry about? Think about that. What are business owners upset about today? Do some research. Look at some polling data, right? What are business owners upset about? What are they upset about in terms of credit card processing? Probably really poor service, confusing statements that they don't understand, right? Salespeople that lie to them, long-term contracts they got locked into, whatever it is. What are your prospects upset about? Maybe it's people calling them constantly and trying to sell them credit card processing. Then use that in your opening pitch. That's what I used to do. I always used to do that. My opening pitch, I would walk in and say, hi, my name is James Shepard, and I'm a local business owner here in the area. Now, before I tell you what I do, I've got to first give a little, you know, preemptive strike here because I'm sure you get called about this about 50 times a day, right? Credit card processing. How many times do you get called people trying to sell you that? And they're like, oh, my goodness, they call me all the time. And I say, oh, I just hate that. Don't you hate that? Yeah, I hate that. Well, you know, I can tell you for me, I'm a local business owner, and so I'm on your side. It drives me nuts, these people calling me from these call centers in India and the Philippines. I believe American businesses should do business with American companies, and I think local businesses should do business with local companies. I'm sure you agree with me, don't you? Yeah, I do. Now I go into my pitch. What did I do? I took something they were angry about, and I channeled it into support for me and for what I'm talking about, which is credit card processing from a local provider, okay? So whatever they're angry about and upset about, bring it up in the opening. Get it out there. Talk about it, right? Figure out a way that you can channel it into support for you. Then you want to listen and learn about their concerns. Now you say, well, how does Donald Trump listen and learn about concerns? I'll tell you exactly how he does it. It's called polling. He spends millions of dollars on polling data. And some of it he doesn't have to spend money on. He gets it from, you know, there's people doing polls all the time. But there's a lot of polling data out there about what Republican primary voters want, which is his target market right now at this moment. And by the way, you mark my words, if and when he were to win the nomination, which I think he's got a very good chance of at this point, if he wins the nomination, you will see his message shift dramatically towards the center. You say, well, why is that? Because Donald Trump is a winner. And what he is saying right now is exactly what he needs to say to win. And when he gets to the general election, he's going to say exactly what he needs to say to win. He's going to find Hillary's weaknesses or whoever it is, and he's going to attack them. Maybe he'll win, maybe he'll lose, but I promise you, he will figure out what his target market wants, and he will find a way, he'll find a way to take that anger and that hatred and those concerns and channel it into support for his initiatives and for his program. Because he's a winner. That's what he does, okay? So listen and learn about concerns. You don't have polling data, but you have real live data out in the field talking to people and finding out what they're concerned with, okay? One more little tip I want to give you about this, and I think this is one of the things I was excited to share today because I really think it's something that's going to be a benefit to you. So let me give you a really, really great tip. When you get to the end of the sale and you have closed the sale already, so let's say I close the sale and say, Mr. Jones, I really appreciate your time today. I think I've answered all your questions for you. And, are there any other questions you have for me? And they're like, no, not really. Okay, great. Well, with your permission, I would like to go ahead and get the paperwork started. And then they're going to say, well, I'm not really ready yet to make a commitment. I need a little more time to think about it. Now, most salespeople in that case would rebuttal that objection. And that's not always a bad thing, but I'll tell you what's even better than that. Rather than rebuttaling the objection, just try to convert the objection into a question, okay? You say, well, how do I do that? Well, here's how you do it. Imagine if somebody said that to you and they said, well, I don't want to make a commitment yet. I really need to think about it. And let's say you offered month-to-month agreements. Now, you might have to, you don't offer that, so you might have to do something different. But let's just assume that you offer month-to-month agreements as part of your program. Here's what I would say. I'd say, Bob, that's a great question. That's a great question. Let me tell you about kind of how that works and how this commitment level really works. So what happens is, I'm going to come out here with a brand new free terminal upgrade, at no cost to you, and I'm going to go ahead and put that in place. I'm going to install that for you. Then what I'm going to do is we're going to take your current terminal, we're just going to put that underneath the counter. I'm not going to cancel your service that you have now. We're going to give it 30 days. At the end of that 30 days, I'm going to come back and I'm going to take a look at your first statement with us, and I'm going to compare it to your last statement with your current company, and you and I are going to sit down and look at it and just compare line by line to see where those savings were and make sure you have a full understanding of our program, because at that point, if you feel like you made the wrong decision, there's no commitment whatsoever. I'll just take my terminal back. We'll take your other terminal and we'll put it right back up there, and then you'll be all set. So, that's such a great question. Are there any other questions you have for me before we move forward? So what that's going to do is when you ask that question, that is going to, you're converting that objection into a question and saying, well, that's a great question, and then you're answering it as if it was a question when obviously in point of fact it wasn't a question, it was an objection. So that's a great way to take an objection and turn it into a buyer sign. Okay? All right, let's move on to our next one here. We got, I think we have what, 2 more? Yeah, 2 more. Okay, let's talk about beating your competitors. Now, if there is one thing that we could say about Donald Trump, that Donald Trump has done incredibly well, it would be beating his competitors. Whether it's, you think about different people that have risen in the polls at different times. Ben Carson was way up in the polls. Then it was Cruz, who won Iowa, and then New Hampshire, South Carolina. What happened to him, right? Marco Rubio, who has not done, he's got some momentum, but he hasn't really done that well in terms of, percentages against him, Chris Christie, who's dropped out, Carly Fiorina, who's dropped out, Jeb Bush, most of all, biggest competitor, who's dropped out, So when we look at these people who've dropped out and we look at how does Donald Trump handle his competitors, maybe there's a couple lessons in there we can learn. Now, I don't think it really translates from politics to sales and business. I don't think it's a case-to-case, thing where it just comes right over like, oh, we can do the same thing Donald Trump does. No, calling your competitors liars and things like that, it's not going to translate very well from ugly politics over to, business. You're going to seem unprofessional, but there's certainly a line there that you don't want to cross. However, I think, at least speaking for myself, I think maybe I've been a little too far on the other side of that line. I've been a little too far on the side of not really trying to do anything to, my competitors at all. I've just kind of been, I always say nice things about my competitors because I don't want to offend anybody. Well, clearly we've learned from Donald Trump and from Bernie Sanders that people don't mind when you are maybe a little bit offensive towards other people that they don't like either, right? So, maybe we can get a little closer to that line without going over it. So let's talk about a couple of ideas about how we might do that. So first of all, how much do you know about your competitors? How much do you know about your competitors? That's a good question, right? How much do you know about your competitors? When one of your prospects brings up and says, well, I'm currently with XYZ company. Do you know anything about XYZ company? If you don't, you need to learn more about them. Look at their website. Call them up and pretend you're a business owner and ask them questions. Find out about their program. Take a look at the statement that you get from a merchant and see if you see anything on there that's a concern. So first of all, how much do you know about your competitors? Number 2, how are you better than your competition? Make sure you fully understand your value proposition, not just in a vacuum. And this is something in business I think happens a lot, and it's very frustrating to me. In business, so many times I see business people and salespeople, they think that they're in a vacuum. They think that they're like the only one. Do you realize that there are other people selling what you're selling and where you're selling it and to who you're trying to sell it to? Do you realize these people could go online and search for something? Do you realize that there's competitors, there's competition out there? So it's not just about your value proposition, because you might have a quote-unquote good value proposition, but if your good value proposition is not as good as your competitors, you're going to lose. So you're not operating in a vacuum. So think about this and ask yourself, what do I really know about my competition, and how is my value proposition better than their value proposition specifically? Make sure you know that information so that you can share that. And then lastly, ask yourself, how often am I talking about my competition? You know, when your merchants say things like, well, I'm currently with this company, or I'm currently with the local bank, or whatever, what do you say? Do you know what you're going to say? How much prepared content do you have to deliver to that business owner that is going to be professional, but at the same time, it is going to be maybe derogatory, and say, well, first of all, I'll say a couple good things about that company. I think they're honest. I think they have integrity. I don't think they provide a bad program on purpose. However, let me just say something. They provide kind of a bad program, okay? And again, I'm not saying that lightly. It's just that when you compare it to our program, it's not a good program. And let me explain what I mean by that. I was just at a merchant's location last week, and he was paying X, Y, and Z, and we don't have any of those fees. You see what I did there? So I start out with it. It's kind of that sandwich, right? Good, bad, and good again. So it's like, you know, this is an honest company. I don't think they do it on purpose, but their program's not very good. Now I'm going to talk about why it's not good, and then I'm going to end with, but again, I think they're a good company. I just think when it comes down to it, you want the best value, don't you, Mr. Jones? So maybe if we push that boundary a little bit further, we could maybe make some more sales that way and catch their attention the same way Donald Trump has done. Okay, last one, and then I'm going to start taking questions. So if you have any questions about any of this or an objection you'd like me to rebuttal, just put it over in the question box over here to the right. The question box over to the right, and I'll be sure to answer your question. By the way, next week, I'll have some additional people involved in this show, and they will be checking Twitter, checking Facebook for me, so you can put them there as well, and then I'll be doing that too, okay? So here we go. Last one. Ready? Project confidence. Again, this is just classic Donald Trump. I mean, this is a guy who got into the campaign with basically no support at all from anybody, and yet he projected confidence, okay? You've got to project confidence. So let's talk about how you can project confidence. And I mean, an interesting mental exercise, right? Imagine Donald Trump sold credit card processing just like you do. And imagine if he walked into a business to sell them that. How do you think he would act? Can you imagine the amount of confidence and passion he would just exude as he went in there, you know? It's an interesting mental exercise to kind of imagine, you know, Donald Trump, the credit card processing sales rep. All right, let's go right here. Walk in with confidence. I just realized all this time I have my camera up here. I should move it down here to this corner like that. Oh, there. That's so much better. Okay. All right, you guys can't even see that, but I'm recording it, and I have my video up, and it was like blocking the slide. Walk in with confidence and passion. With confidence and passion, okay? When you walk into a business, your personality should explode into that business. Now, that doesn't mean when you walk in, you start talking right away, but you got a big smile on your face. You're walking upright with this confidence. There's a couple really good YouTube videos on body language you should watch. Make sure you've got the right body language, the right shake of the hand. You're making eye contact, and you're coming in, and you're just excited. I'm so excited. Mr. Jones, it's great to be here today. Boy, isn't this a beautiful day outside? That's awesome. Hey, you know what? The reason I stopped by today, and you know, you've got that excitement, that passion. That's going to go a long way, and that's really going to help you a lot. Okay. Next is walk in with an excuse. Now, let me explain how I've kind of gotten this from Donald Trump. Okay, and from Ben Carson, and to a lesser extent from Bernie Sanders. Okay. When Donald Trump announced his presidency, you know, this may be the first year in presidential politics when the electorate has been so excited about somebody who wasn't a politician. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's kind of like if you went into the emergency room and found out you had a problem with your brain aneurysm or something, and they came to you and said, a doctor came and said, I am going to operate on your brain, and I've got some exciting new ideas about how to do that because I've never operated on a brain before. You know, how would you feel about that, right? You know, it's like, I've never done this before, and so I've got some great ideas. Wow. You know what I mean? It's amazing that pitch works. And that's the Donald Trump pitch. That's the Ben Carson pitch. That's, to a lesser extent, the Bernie Sanders pitch. The idea is, I've never been in politics. I have never been a governor. I've never run anything dealing with government administration, which makes me the perfect candidate to be the president of the United States. And so, again, we could argue the political or the philosophical realities of this, but the truth is that resonates. That's a great excuse in terms of politics. It's like, you have to excuse me, I need to run for politics because the political class is terrible. They're ineffective. I don't think most Americans believe that American government is very ineffective, which is true. And, there's a lot of things they don't do well. And so the American electorate is like, yes, we want somebody who's not a politician to be a politician, And it's amazing watching somebody like Donald Trump beating all the other politicians at their own game. Make no mistake, Donald Trump is a politician now, and he's doing a great job at it. And so, he's winning, and that's what matters. He's winning. And so when you look at him and you see this kind of confidence, he had this excuse when he got in, which was, now how does that relate to what we're talking about in sales? Well, it does relate, and here's how it relates. The way it relates is this. When you walk into a business, I always want to have an excuse where it's like, I didn't walk, it's like, I'm coming in here to sell you, but that's not why I walked in, The reason I walked in is because, hey, I was walking by, I've seen your business several times. What do you guys, what's good here? It's a restaurant. Or how long have you guys been here? And so I have this excuse. I was walking by, or I've heard about them, but I've never introduced myself, or whatever it is. I've always got that excuse when I walk in, and it's like, yes, I'm there to sell them, but I'm not really here to sell you. All right, let's go to the next one here. Walk in with a value proposition, okay? Make sure you're projecting confidence by you have to believe in your value proposition. You have to know, I'm going to have the best solution for you no matter what. And by the way, the big idea that I'm working on, I'm going to roll out here in a little while with, I mentioned the computer programmer. We're making an amazing mobile app and some other cool stuff. It's going to be unreal, and you're going to know that you have the best value proposition every single time. Walk in with self-confidence. Walk in with self-confidence, okay? So you have to believe in yourself before you can get other people to believe in you. So you may need some self-help books. If you have low self-esteem, you're going to have a really hard time selling. And so get some self-confidence about yourself. Read some books, learn some things, and make sure you've got that self-confidence. All right, I'm going to